A whirlwind of toxic miasma engulfs a moon in a distant corner of the galaxy. The flora and fauna rot away as a sinister laugh cackles across the valleys of death. The noxious clouds part as a massive orb of multicolored flame plummets towards Mortarion. The Pale King surrounds himself with Nurgle's rot flies as the warp flame takes the shape of the Crimson King, Magnus the Red. The two demon Primarchs brandish their weapons, and the Chaos Gods themselves are in awe. Which one of their pawns would emerge victorious? That is the question that we will answer in today's episode of Grim Dark Battles. What is up, guys? It's the Sound Alchemist, part of One Mind Syndicate, and today I'm back to talk about Warhammer 40K. So a couple years back, I had this, ongoing series known as Grim Dark Battles, where I would pit two warriors of the 40K universe against one another. In that one, I had Mortarion against Magnus. At the time, these were very recent Primarchs that have just come out onto the game with actual models and new updated lore. So I was thinking, would these Grimdark battles still hold up today? It's been a couple editions since then, and I feel like even though we have more rules, more lore for these guys, I still think the victor is still the same as back then. So let's go ahead and see if anything changes within the confines of these two Primarchs going at it. Raised on Prospero, Magnus was mentored by the Psyker scholar Amon. He then mastered every psychic training and any program given to him, and he quickly became the strongest person in that world. He then purged the Psych New and Warp entities and became the hero of Prospero. Magnus was always special from the beginning, even amongst his other Primarch brothers, for he had remembered everything since his creation, and he even conversed with the Emperor psychically. So when the Emperor came to Prospero for his son, the two embraced and conversed like they were old friends. Unfortunately, the Space Marines created under Magnus's gene seed had multiple psychic mutations, and he spent 60 years trying to cure the flesh change. He even lost his right eye in a bargain with a warp entity, which later turned out to be Tzeentch. Although the flesh change did stop, it only lasted for a small amount of time. During the Great Crusade, Magnus's use of warp powers caused a schism amongst the Primarchs, and the Council of Nicaea had to be held. Here, the Emperor decreed that all librarians were to cease the use of psychic powers, all except for the astropaths and navigators. However, Magnus still continued to practice and study the warp in secret. Magnus then foresaw the events of the Horus Heresy, and when his attempts to talk his brothers out of it failed, he attempted to psychically warn the Emperor. Unfortunately, a barrier was erected around the Imperial Palace, and Magnus had no choice but to accept power from chaos in order to break through. This led to demons pouring into the Emperor's throne room. The Emperor managed to slay them all, but in his anger, he banished Magnus for his insolence, and he paid no heed to the warnings of his son. The Emperor then sent Leman Russ and his Space Wolves to arrest Magnus for his wrongdoings, but Horus then ordered Russ for the destruction of the Thousand Suns and the execution of Magnus the Red. This led to the burning of Prospero and a great battle between the two Primarchs. But just as Russ was about to kill Magnus, a deal was struck with Tzeentch, and all of the Thousand Suns were teleported away to safety. Magnus and his legion would live, but at what cost? Throughout the events of the heresy, Magnus helped Mortarion in controlling his innate psychic abilities. He even killed Malkador and went on to kill the Emperor, but Vulcan stopped him. During this fight, the Emperor showed Magnus what could have been: a future of prosperity, a future with no heresy. But Magnus had to sacrifice his legion for this future to become reality. Angered at this, Magnus fully gave himself over to chaos. After the heresy, the demon prince Magnus fought against the Space Wolves upon Fenris, heavily damaging their gene seed factories, and he also helped in creating a massive warp rift across the galaxy. Magnus then fought against Roboute Guilliman upon Luna, and he was about to slay his loyalist brother until the Sisters of Silence arrived, and weakened him to the point where Guilliman was able to stab Magnus through his heart, sending him reeling back into the warp. Now let's take a look at the lore and history of Mortarion. Mortarion was raised on the world of Barbarous, a mountainous planet with poison fog clouds. He was taken in by a sorceress warlord, and he was taught the ways of war. As he grew up, he raised an army of villagers and went on to battle against his adopted father. However, the poisonous fog was too much, and Mortarion was on the brink of succumbing to the poison. But a mysterious man saved him. This was none other than the Emperor. During the Great Crusade, Mortarion was weary of Magnus and Psykers in general. He was great friends with Horus, and many questioned his loyalties to the Emperor, but the Emperor said that loyalty to Horus would be the same as being loyal to him. When the heresy began, Mortarion's hatred for what the Emperor had become really fueled him. In his eyes, he was just like his adopted father on Barbarous, a tyrant drunk on power, a warp-tainted aberration, and this led to him hating Psykers even more. Mortarion and his Legion of Death Guard betrayed the Imperium at Isfahan III, as well as at the Drop Site Massacre. He fought against Jagtai Khan, but the battle ended in a draw. He also banished a demon with his innate psychic powers, and after fighting against Typhon and getting infected by the Destroyer Hive, he reluctantly had no choice but to pledge himself to Nurgle's servitude. After the battle on Terra and Horus's defeat, Nurgle elevated Mortarion to the rank of Demon Prince. His next feats were the slaying of the Supreme Grand Master of the Grey Knights, Garrow-Nation, but then came one of his most humiliating defeats at the hands of Drago, who uttered Mortarion's true name, weakened him to the point where he was able to be pinned down, his chest cavity ripped open, and Garrow-Nation's name carved into Mortarion's chest before being banished into the warp. However, in most recent of events, Mortarion has spread the God Blight, a disease capable of killing even a Primarch. Unfortunately, Nurgle and Mortarion never saw eye to eye, and because of this, he ignored Nurgle's commands, and he ended up fighting against Guilliman. Mortarion came out victorious during this bout, and he tried to bring his brother over to the side of chaos. However, Guilliman reawoke, and he channeled the raw powers of the Emperor himself. Mortarion was losing against this newly empowered Guilliman, and because of this, he had no choice but to flee before him. Warp storms howled across the dead sky, licking flesh from bone and turning matter to madness. In the cratered plains once home to cities, now graveyards of stone and filth, two titans of the Traitor Legion stood facing one another. They had once been brothers, but now they are nothing but monsters wearing the skin of gods. Mortarion, demon Primarch of the Death Guard, clad in filth and disease, slick Baroque armor fused with rust and bone, wings of necrotic leather, heavy with rot. His colossal scythe, Silence, dripped with alchemical poisons that boiled flesh upon contact and unraveled souls. Magnus the Red, demon Primarch of the Thousand Suns, sorceress Colossus wreathed in flickering runes and psychic flame. His cyclopean eyes smoldered with hate and clairvoyant insight. He carries with him the blade of An-Kaal, a weapon forged in the madness of the Immaterium, each strike a curse and a cataclysm. On the blasted dais of a shattered temple to Tzeentch, Magnus calls out across the ruin. You were always death, Mortarion, but now you are merely a corpse walking. Mortarion's breath fogged the air with spores, rust, and contagion. And you were always a liar. Now just a mutation pretending to be a god. No champions, no armies, no distractions, just 2 Primarchs, and only one would walk away from this clash. Magnus was the first to strike. A scream of warp fire and thought blades surged forwards, reality crackling under his will. Mortarion allowed the hit, and where Magnus's arcane assault shredded armor and flayed ceramite, the Death Lord's body only reeked more deeply of decay, the corruption absorbing the damage like a sponge. With a bellow, Mortarion leapt, wings snapping wide. His scythe cleaved the air with an arc impossible for a blade of its size. Magnus parried with a storm of psychic force, but the sheer weight of Mortarion's swing split the ether open. The edge of silence grazed Magnus's chest, and skin sloughed off like wax, steaming and rotting simultaneously. Magnus roared, not in pain, but in fury. He answered with a maelstrom of change, summoning a vortex of demon tongues and screams. Mortarion's wings shredded under the onslaught. Pus and ichor sprayed across the plains. Still, the Lord of Death advanced, dragging silence like an executioner would. Time cracked, and Magnus moved, 1,000 selves striking in tandem, but Mortarion's sheer inevitability cut through illusion and possibility. With a grunt, he rammed his plague-wreathed fist into Magnus's gut, unloading a cocktail of sepsis and soul pox. The Crimson King staggered, vomiting blood and warp light. Magnus responded by ripping a moon fragment from the sky with thought alone and hurling down like a meteor. Mortarion's body was crushed to the earth. The ground buckled, and for a mere moment, silence. Rot-stained fog began to arise, and Mortarion crawled free, bones shattered, torso caved, but laughing. A gurgling disease sound that echoed like a death knell. From beneath his broken helm, his yellowed eyes gleamed. You cannot kill what welcomes death. Magnus uttered a chant, and Mortarion whispered a counter-prayer of unmaking, the syllables rotting the air and making Magnus's incantations falter. Mortarion struck, and silence bit deep. Through Magnus's cyclopean eye, a gory explosion of blood and warp stuff and bone followed. Magnus fell, his last breath a howl of disbelief, his essence splittering into 1,000 shards, back into the warp. The winner of this grim-dark battle is none other than Mortarion, the god of plague.
Oh, I guess I put my